Good afternoon, everyone. Well, at least afternoon in Ontier. My name is Ana de la Sara. I am an artisan and a baroness of Ontier. I also am a heavy fighter, which is part of why I'm so warm this morning. My boyfriend and I went out and fought about an hour ago, so I'm just trying to recover from that, but it was fun. So I'm here today to talk to you about silk banner painting. Just a little bit of history on me. I entered the SCA having a very technical science and math background. I did not consider myself an artist at all. And the first time that I really stumbled into an art that changed my mind was actually through scribal artwork in the SCA. And I took the office on thinking that I would provide majorly logistics support, and it ended up that I did in fact have some artistic license in there. So I did that for probably 3 to 4 years. And then in 2017, my boyfriend, who had been working toward becoming a knight, was put on vigil. And his one major ask of me was that he really wanted to have banners at his ceremony. We are both major fans of Kingdom of Heaven. It's a great movie. I highly recommend the director's cut if you have not seen it. But specifically, there is a scene in that movie that shows a large medieval army moving across a space, and there are thousands of banners. So that was his dream. So I said, all right, I've seen it done before, I'll give it a try. And that was in September of 2017. I think the last time I tallied, I've made approximately one banner a week since that time. I'm somewhere over 350 to 400 total silk pieces at this point. So boy, did I get thrown into the deep end on something that I didn't know I would love as much as I do. So my goal here is to help sort of demystify the process. It's not as scary as you think. And although there is some purchasing, like many crafts, to get involved with it, there are ways to make it cheaper and easier for you. So on the Facebook group, on the event, I published a link to my documentation. I'm going to run through this with you guys at first and just sort of do a little bit of lecture based on these notes. If you did not find the link or you can't get the link to work, let me know, or let Baroness Disa know, and we will get a copy emailed to you at the very least. So without further ado, so when it comes to banner painting, there are many methods, and I want you to know this is the method that works best for me. If you find ways that make you more comfortable or easier for you to do, then I absolutely encourage you to go with it. There is no right way to do banner painting.
Just one moment. I have put the link for the documentation into the chat. So if people want to grab it, they can grab it now.
Thank you. So other thing. Oh, one of the major things that I'm known for in Ontier is I have a somewhat distinctive style, both for layout and color, but also I do a lot of color blending, which I guess is not something that is common amongst silk painters. So I will teach you the way that I do that today, and then you will have that knowledge and can share it in your area as well. So materials. Obviously, silk is an important piece. I purchase the majority of my silk in pre-hemmed sizes that I get from Dharma Trading. This is a really little one. This is a 22 by 22. And as you'll see, it's got a nice little rolled hem. And I do this because, to be perfectly blunt, I hate hemming silk. There are benefits and drawbacks to this method, but this is the one that works best for me. If you go to Dharma Trading and look at their silk scarves and sarongs section, they have a huge chunk of different sizes and shapes. So that is where I would start out. You can use unhemmed silk cuts. I have done that before for larger pieces or pieces that are not rectangular or square. So a lot of dovetail, if you want to do rounded ends, things like that. Be aware that silk, when hemmed, especially when roll hemmed, does not show those sharp the frames that I use. I will show you this one I've got set out for.
Can you back up just a little bit? You froze for a second. So you said
sure.
something about it doesn't have the sharp, and then you stopped.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
Okay.
when you are doing a roll hem on silk, it doesn't have the sharp straight line distinction the way that other materials that you hem might, because it is a rolled hem instead of a flat hem. So essentially, just be prepared for there to be a little bit of variance in shape, but it is not a big enough deal to worry about because they're going to be 10 to 20 feet up in the air. So the next item that is critical for me is a frame. And there are lots of different options for frames. Some people prefer to make a wooden frame. I don't know if you can see over in this corner. I have this giant wooden frame that I am using to make a linen banner. I'm making this one in a more period style. So I actually built this to be the correct size, and I've sewn this material onto the frame. This is time consuming, and it's really hard to store those frames because they don't break down. So my preference for making frames is PVC. So this is an example of that. I basically go to the hardware store, buy 10 feet of PVC. I think this is 1/2 inch. No, this is 3/4 inch. And then I cut it down to whatever sizes I want. I actually have an entire drawer of just PVC pieces in various sizes. To make my life easier, I write the measurement on each of them so that if I am doing a 22 by 22 piece, I know that 24 is probably the minimum I want to start with for length on that, so that I have some give when I'm attaching it. So to attach my banners, this particularly works well for the pre-hemmed ones because they have that little roll on the edge. I use a combination of basic office rubber bands and alligator clips. I love these because they're fairly cheap. You can buy them in bulk. They're not hard to store. And if a rubber band or a clip gives out, you chuck it and you got a box of 150 more. I will vary how many rubber bands are attached to the frame depending on how much extra space I have between my silk and the size of the frame. But the idea is you want the silk to be taut. It doesn't have to be drum tight, but you do not want it to, you don't want it to slope down and have contact with any of the surfaces underneath, because your silk dye is going to flow along any surface it can, and you want to minimize the movement of that anywhere except for where you put the color. So the way that I attach the PVC frames is with these nifty little, I don't know, what would you call them? What would you call them, Disa?
Elbows.
Elbows, thank you.
His Excellency says elbows.
Perfect, thank you, sir. And the other neat part about these is that you can also buy different layouts. For example, if I need to connect two pieces to make something longer, I have a straight connection. I can also buy T-connections. I like this one in particular because when I do very large banners, I will often have to extend them off the table, and this allows me to add legs to that section by putting another piece of PVC in here. As far as cutting the PVC down to the correct size, this is the tool that I use. You can also get this at the hardware store. It's probably less than $5 in the US, but it's super helpful and it cuts through the PVC real easy. So I recommend having one of these guys on hand. It just makes sizing everything easier.
What weight of silk do you use?
So my preference on silk is the tighter weave, the better. So at Dharma Trading, they offer, I believe, as low as 8 millimeter. I want to say is what the notation is, up to 19. And what that has to do with is the number of threads in a particular measure. So I prefer the heavier because one, it holds up better in the weather. So it's not going to fray and wear as fast. And two, the more threads that you have, the more color it will maintain. So you're going to get much richer colors with that heavier weight of silk. And they're not a huge difference price-wise. So given a preference, I'll go with the heavier. My preferred finish for the silk is either silk satin. The silk charmeuse is actually also very good, as long as it does not have any of the fuzzy or extra thread bits sticking off. You want to make sure that it's got a nice smooth surface, because again, anything that conduct color in here is going to do that. So you want to keep it as smooth as possible. Let's see. So the colors that I use are the Jacquard Dynaflow fabric colors. You can find them in 2.2 or 2.25 ounces, 8 ounces, or I think they also have really big bottles, like 36 ounces at this point. These go a long way. So I can make a relatively large banner in one color, usually with one, maybe 1.5 of the smallest color bottles. So to give you an idea, this is the 2.25 ounce. This is the 8 ounce. So for colors that I use a lot of, like white, black, red, gold, I'll buy the bigger ones. For the more interesting off-the-wall colors like chartreuse, I'll buy a smaller one. You can buy these individually, either on Dharma Trading or on Amazon.com. There are also several packs available on both of those. One of them is a classroom pack that includes, let's see, droppers, resistant application bottles, bamboo brushes, although to be honest, the bamboo brushes are not great for what we're doing. And then 30 of these small bottles of the Dynaflow colors. And the cool part about that is it lets you get one of each of the available colors and sort of play with it. So you can decide whether or not it's worth investing in a larger bottle. All right. Be aware that Jacquard also makes a similar product called a textile color. And I don't recommend this. You can use it. It will still color your silk, but it's going to have a much thicker consistency, like an acrylic paint. These are much more fluid, if you can hear when I shake them. And so if you're wanting to do something that blends, these are much easier to use. The acrylic paint consistency is technically closer to something they would use in period. But if we're going for the anachronistic beauty and use, I recommend these over that. Lastly, so resist. So I use a Gouda-based resist. There are also water-based resists. I am not as comfortable with those. They do wash out. The Gouda that I use is almost always black because I really like the clear outlines and very visually dynamic look that they have. Think of them sort of like coloring book outlines. It's really easy to see from far away. If you're looking to do something more artistic, they also create the Gouda Resist in clear and gold and silver. The clear is interesting in that you can also mix some of your dye into your clear resist and make your resist a different color if you want to. I have not done too much experimentation with that simply because that hasn't really been necessary with regards to the kind of art that I'm doing. But I welcome you guys to play with that and find things that work for you.
Somebody asked a question and I've got to ask it. So Gouda, like the cheese?
No. Gouda, it's spelled G-U-T-T-A. Essentially, it contains isopropanol and naphtha. They recommend not to eat it, which I highly agree with. But
there's another Gouda for that. It's not.
Yeah. Basically, it has the consistency of like Elmer's glue, and for me, that allows me to do much finer line work because it doesn't spread the way that a water-based resist does. So this is my preference. Again, if you decide that the water-based one it works better for you, awesome. I do know because this is a flammable product, sometimes there are different requirements or special shipping that it has to have depending on what country you're in. So it's worth looking at. I think that you can also get this Gouda Resist at Dick Blick's if you live in the Northwest of the United States. All right.
And all of these links will be available on the blog post that goes with this recording. So if anyone's looking for those.
All right. So methodology. So I'm going to actually build the frame that I'm going to use today while I talk to you guys. If it gets too crazy or loud, let me know and I will stop. So the tried and true method that I have found with regards to specifically making commissions for people with silk banners is the first part of the discussion we have is, okay, what size or shape do you want? Once we figure that out, I then ask them, okay, what sort of items do you want to display on your banner? Do you want it to be something pictorial, like a fox and some moons? Do you want it to be heraldry? Do you want to have a motto? Kind of get an idea of all of the pieces that they want to encompass. In the SCA, the cool part is a big chunk of the layout has been prescribed, although it is not written anywhere that I have found. And if you look in the handout, actually, it's a terrible example of it. Well, it's partially a good example. So if you look in the handout, I gave 2 examples at the bottom of, I want to say the second page. And they are in black and white in mine. I believe that online they're in color. But this is an example of 2 mock-ups that I did for one person with the various pieces that she wanted. Now, when I talk about the layout being prescribed, you can kind of see it here. For example, if someone would like to include the heraldry of their kingdom, that is always going to be closest to the pole attachments here. If they also would like to include heraldry for their barony, shire, or otherwise, that would probably come next. At that point, when you get to the personal pieces on the banner, things like peerages, mottos, personal heraldry, those can really go in any layout that you want. But the most important part is that order of precedent for kingdom, geographical location, then all of the personal bits. Having said that, there is no banner lawyer that's going to call you down if you decide to make it different. That is just the prescribed norm for the SCA, at least in Ontier. So once I speak with that person and get the elements that they want, I actually go to my computer, create a mock-up of the correct size of the banner digitally, And then I start taking all their pieces and sort of inserting them and creating different mock-up options. This serves two purposes. One, it allows that person to have a visual reference for here's what all of the pieces you want to include will look like together. And two, it allows me to add color to look at the color balance across the banner. I find that if you can sort of make things visually symmetrical with regards to color and pattern, I suppose, it's going to be much more pleasing to the eye than if you have, you know, contrary colors, I suppose would be the best way to put it.
What program do you use to make your mock-ups?
So I use PowerPoint. Yes, I know that's not what it's for, but it allows me to change the size and it allows me to add and edit small graphical pieces enough that it serves my purpose. It also allows me to duplicate slides and move different pieces around without having to recreate the entire banner every time. And then when I'm sending the mock-up options to my customers, I can take a screenshot of all 7 or 8 of them, all right in a row, so that they can sort of see, okay, here are all the different options. At that point, we have a discussion of, okay, I like this, I don't like this, can we move this over here? Can we shrink this, enlarge it, whatever. Once we come up with a final design, then I move on to the next piece, which is for me. And this is where I draw a scaling model.
Can I ask one more question really quick?
Yes.
This wasn't asked here, but this might be a helpful one for people to know. Where do you find your pieces of art for the mock-ups?
So there are actually a huge number of online options, but I mean, you can just Google heraldic and then like heraldic bear or rampant bear or things like that, and you can usually find something interesting to work with. But the SCA actually has a great website for heraldic specifically, heraldic reference items, and it's called heraldicart.org. And that is probably my #1 go-to place to pick up pieces that are nice and clean and easy to copy and scale. And actually, let me show you an example of some of the stuff I pull off of there. So I, for better or worse, keep everything that I use on banners because I never know if I'm going to use it again. So let's see. Trying to find a good example for you here. Although I also do pull art from everywhere all the time. So like, I don't think this came from the Heraldic art website. This came from the Dragon's Nest website, and then I upscaled it. This probably came off of the heraldicart.org website. Let's see. This is a piece of art that was a painting that someone sent to me, and I basically went through it with my light table and recreated the line work so that I could create the Monkey King for him. Here, this is a good example. Here's a butterfly that I pulled off the Heraldic art website. So if you go in there, it's also very nice because they have a lot of the heraldic field types. They have a lot of the heraldic field divisions, and they offer them both in a squared version as well as a shield shaped version. So it makes life much easier not having to recreate those things. Does that help?
Very much.
Cool. All right. So once we get our design figured out, I go grab a piece of graph paper and I basically draw it out. I'm going to get a little closer so you can see this because it's in pencil. So I basically draw it out to scale on a piece of graph paper. And this allows me to confirm, one, that I'm going to be able to get all those pieces in there in a way that they will still be easily discernible at distance. And two, it offers me an opportunity to get an approximate measurement for each section. So you'll see I wrote in here 12 by 12 wreath, 10 by 10 lion, and that helps me in my next step. My next step is what I call my cheater step. I cannot draw to save my life. So if you're in the same boat, it's okay. So what I do is once I find those elements that I want to include in the banner, I put them in a program, I scale them up to the correct size, and I print them off at that size. There is a very cool option in a lot of PDF files that allow you to take something at the correct size and print it as a poster, which automatically divides the photo into 3, 6, 9 pieces of paper. And then later you can go back and basically tape them together. This allows me to trace all of my elements so I don't have to be cringy about my own ability to draw things.
We have another question. Sorry,
Yes.
did I interrupt you?
No worries.
Okay, somebody asked, I worry about stealing someone's art. If it's online and I don't see a copyright on it, is it okay to use the graphic, or will I be offending someone?
So that's kind of a gray line. I would say with basic elements, like if you're looking for a dog or a lion or something like that, it's probably fine. If you are looking for something that is more personalized, for example, the Monkey King that I showed you, it might be prudent to contact the artist if they are not the person providing you with that art, just to make sure. I don't believe that copyright is that big a deal if you are not making money from it. So if you are borrowing a particularly pretty tiger that you really like for your personal arms, and you're going to use it to fly in the SCA, I really don't think it will be an issue. If that does not make you comfortable, there are many, many options that are public domain that you can use, and the heraldicart.org is one of those.
Can I also add that there's actually an option in searching on Google where you can search specifically for Creative Commons items, and Creative Commons items are they're basically free for public use, so you can actually filter your search and only find things in Creative Commons.
That's
so
awesome.
that's just something that I've used when I've been concerned about that.
Good idea. All right, so I apologize, my dog needs to go out just a moment, please.
Yeah, Creative Commons. If you look up Creative Commons, that's a kind of a public use copyright option. There's a whole website on it, and a lot of state agencies and things. I used to work for a state agency. A lot of state agencies use that for their stuff. You can basically tell people you can use this for education, you can use this for private use, but not to make money. You know, you can give several options. So I would, I'd recommend just typing in, searching for Creative Commons and looking that up. It's actually very interesting. I use it on all of my documentation and stuff. So
that's a really cool option. Thank you. All right. So we've gotten to the point where we printed off all of our pieces. Now, what I would generally do is I get my silk framed up. You can also do this ahead of time before you frame it. So I frame up my silk because that way I know it's stretched evenly and it's not going to torque in a weird way because it's on the table. And then I trace my designs onto the silk. However, you can also lay your designs down on a table and use painter's tape to help keep your silk taut and then trace them on the table surface. This tends to be easier for people that have less of a steady hand, because that way you're not balancing on the PVC while you're trying to draw. So it's kind of your preference. And I draw on silk with a regular number 2 pencil. You can use a mechanical pencil, but be aware that because it's much sharper with the lead, it may pull on some of the silk fibers. So you got to be kind of gentle with it. The one thing I will say is if you're tracing and you make a mistake, don't worry about it. It will show a tiny bit under light colored banner dye, but again, once it's up in the air, nobody's gonna see it. So if you end up making an error, go ahead and make a little X on it so you know not to resist that line, and go ahead and move forward with the correction with your pencil. Don't try and erase. It will make a really funky smudge on your silk and it will not help anything. Let's see. All right. So I'm gonna give you a quick demo of the way that I get silk onto a frame. So here's the frame I built. Here's our silk piece. I basically build frames so that they're approximately 2 to 4 inches bigger in each direction than the silk that I'm using. That allows me to make sure that the rubber bands are keeping the silk taut, which again is really the most important piece. So in this situation, I've actually tied 2 rubber bands together. This is literally the mechanism that we all used in elementary school to make friendship bracelets. Take the 2, stick them together, pull tight. So basically, I wrap the rubber band like this around the frame, grab both edges, take my alligator clip like so, and then grab the edge of my silk. Ta-da! All right. Sometimes you'll have alligator clips that don't want to hold. Just chuck them and get a new one. No amount of messing with them is going to make them hold better. Trust me, I've tried. The very first time you use this method, it's going to be a little bit frustrating. It's going to be a little bit cumbersome. That's okay. That's okay. So if you have silk that you want to work on putting on a frame now, please feel free and do that. If you would like to wait till the end, I will also be happy to hang out if people have questions or need suggestions for individual work pieces that they're doing.
While you're putting that together, we had a quick question, sorry. What program do you use to scale up your images?
To scale them up?
Yeah.
I use a combination of 2 programs that are definitely not made for what I use them for, but they're cheap, and by that I mean free. So I use a combination of Photoshop and Microsoft Paint 3. Specifically, the newer version of Paint is much more useful. It allows you to do things like removing backgrounds, to scale up and down either by inches or pixels. And it allows you to make color corrections if you want to do that for your mock-up. So I realize technically things like Photoshop would be more useful for that, but they're also quite a bit more expensive. So when you are framing up your silk, I highly recommend that you start on one end and then do the reciprocal at the other side. This is going to make sure that you have an even distribution of pull in both directions. If you are doing a larger piece, specifically a longer piece, start at one end, do all 4 corners, and then go back and add your middle supports. Or if you're lucky enough to have a partner helping you out with that, you basically can just mirror each other down the length of the banner. So sometimes when you put on your supports, you will find that it is not particularly tight. At that point, you can also use a single rubber band. It'll bring it a little bit closer to the frame, but it allows you to adjust how tight it is. I seem to be missing one this morning. I'm sure one of my cats has borrowed it to play with. So essentially you're going to end up like this. The other bit I would tell you is when you buy silk from Dharma, it comes with this cute little tag attached to one hem. You can go ahead and just pull that off. All right. So for this one, you can kind of see it's a little wobbly. That means it's probably not tight enough. At this point, I'm gonna leave it and we may come back to that in a little bit. But you get the gist of the way that they're gonna fit on your banner frame. All right. So your silk is on your frame. It's then time to draw your design on if you haven't already. And then we get to the resist part. So the tools that I use for resist are a little bit different than the ones that are sold for this purpose. I ran into these, I don't remember when I ran into them, but I found them to be massively helpful for my control of detail. I apologize, I keep disappearing over here because I'm getting into my supply cabinet. I have an entire cabinet of silk painting supplies there in the black on the left. So just to give you an idea of the size of things. So anyway, resist applicators. So there are some that are made for this purpose that you can buy online. They tend to look like really small glue bottles. They've got really long metal noses. Some people really prefer those. I have a hard time controlling the application and flow of the resist through those. So I've opted for something a little bit smaller. Although if I fill this bottle with resist, I usually don't need to refill it unless I'm doing a very large banner. So the tip of this is actually the biggest key. So the bottle itself comes with a screw-on cap. Right? There we go. That has a little dropper end. So it looks like that normally. The cool part is, if you take the head of a mechanical pencil, you can stick it on there and just sort of push it down, and it gives you a much finer point. This allows much more detail, and it allows control of the flow of the resist so that you can choose how thick you want your lines. So if you look at this guy, he's got much finer detail up here in his eye area, and a little bit thicker down here near his legs and body. But you can see individual claws, you can see his individual eyeball, his nose, his teeth. That comes from using that finer tipped point. So essentially I use it the way I would a pencil, and you can basically shake it once you have the resist in there to get it down to the tip, and you barely have to squeeze it to get the right amount. Now to get the resist in this bottle, I found these nifty little tiny, I forgot the word.
Funnels.
Funnel, thank you.
You're welcome.
So tiny, tiny funnels. And I love them because they're metal. They fit in the bottle head perfectly, and it keeps me from spilling resist all over my fingers and anything underneath where I'm pouring. So this is my big bottle of resist. This is black. I highly recommend that you shake any resist that you're going to use before you use it, because sometimes it separates in the can, and that's going to affect the viscosity of the substance. So essentially, one little blorp. I always recommend that you put the lid back on. It smells like paint. You're going to feel really high if you do not recap that. And then there you go, there's your resist. So I take my funnel and I put it into another metal container. These guys, they're basically sauce cups like you would buy at a restaurant, or like you would see at a restaurant, work really well. The reason I do this is because the resist is going to continue to drip down off of that, and it will dry stuck to whatever it's laying on, to make sure it's not something that you value highly. The cool part about the resist is once it is dry on this surface, I can grab it and peel it off the way that I could dry glue. So cleaning it up once it's dry is very, very easy. All right, so I've got my bottle, got my resist. I'm gonna put my cap on, and then I keep a needle in my stuff just to sort of plumb that head to make sure that there's no dry resist stuck in there. And now I am ready to apply resist to my banner. So I'm just gonna give a quick little show of this. Let's see if I can change the angle of my camera without making you guys seasick. Oh, sorry. All right. Give me for just a second here. All right. So here's the design that I'm going to add on to this guy. I don't know if you can see, very easy to see through the silk. So I'm just going to do a quick sketch of this. Notice my lines are not perfect, and that's okay. All right, so there's my design. So now I can take my resist. I'm gonna tap it out on a piece of paper or paper plate or something nearby. So, oops. All right. The one thing I would caution you on is sometimes if this gets jammed up, the resist will try and come out here. So just keep an eye on whether it's dripping. 90% of the time it's not a problem, but occasionally you'll have an errant drop. So if you are right-handed, I recommend that you start on the left, generally in the top corner on the left, if you can. You'll see I'm barely applying any squeeze on this, and I'm already getting a fairly good flow of resist. So the important part about resist application is you want to make sure that every line is solid and every line connects. Having said that, it does not have to be a super fat line. It can be a fairly fine line if you would like, but it does need to make sure and contact every other line in your drawing or you're going to have color leakage. Be aware that it takes practice to get comfortable doing fine lines. So, you know, after over 1,000 hours of practice, my hand is relatively steady, relatively quick and confident on what I'm doing. This may not be what you experience at first, but don't give up.
I was going to say, I've done a couple of banners and my resist is not nearly as quick or nearly as steady. So it takes some practice. She's just magical.
Well, she's just practiced and practiced and practiced.
Yeah, you've spent a lot of time.
Trust me, I have done my fair share of stuff that I'm like, well, that's garbage. And you know, no matter what, woo, there we go. I bounced that one really good. No matter what, you will occasionally have something leak. It's just the way of life. Sometimes the resist is a bad batch. Sometimes the silk is imperfect. Sometimes you missed a hole that's so minute that it's almost impossible to see. And there are ways to recover from that. And I will work on showing you some of those before we're done today. But sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, do you push the resist into the fabric to help with the color flow?
Nope, I do not do anything to the resist. I merely let it flow onto the fabric and then it sinks in on its own. Now, the one thing that I will tell you about the pre-hemmed pieces of silk is that if you do a design in the middle, you're totally fine. You don't need to worry about this. If you have stripes or checky, that's on tier for you. If you have stripes or checky or anything that needs to touch an edge, do you see how it's rolled right there? It's super important that when you get to that edge, you not only go over it on that side, you need to flip it over and connect it on the back as well. I don't know if you can see that very clearly, because otherwise it's gonna travel through that roll from one side to the other. So make sure that when you hit edges with your rolled hems, you are doing a little bit on both sides. And that may make it a little bit wider at that spot, but again, it's really not going to be super visual when it's high up in the air. All right, so we've got our little rows, the resist is done. Once I am finished with the resist, I pop the cap back off and I can actually empty a good chunk of this back into the container so that I can use it later. Do not leave resist in the applicators and try and use it later. There is something about its exposure to the air that makes it less usable, because this fresh resist will sink into the fibers. Once it starts to do that plasticizing thing where it starts getting more of a consistency of glue and drying partially, it will sit on top of your fabric, which means you're going to have all kinds of weird bleed come through if you try and use it to resist after it's been sitting out for more than probably 4 or 5 hours. So I recommend, if you have the ability, sit down and resist an entire piece. It can be, you know, one element, it can be a whole half of the banner, it can be the whole banner, but use the resist that you pour out or put it back in its container. Do not leave it out. Alrighty. So once the resist is applied, I generally give it a minimum of a half an hour to, well, maybe not even a half an hour. This is pretty, well, this is pretty dry. I give it long enough that these thicker pieces are dry. And if you can see, they're still a little bit shiny, so we're probably gonna need to give that a minute before we can apply dye to this without it being a problem. So I'm gonna let that sit there for a minute. Let's see. Okay, so in the documentation, I made a point to say you can use resist to write out letters or words. If they're big enough to apply color inside of them, I recommend that you use color, even if they're black. If you resist all the way across a letter that is a large space, it tends to get sticky, and that can be a problem later if you're storing your silk in a place that is not cool. Then you're going to have that resist sticking to other pieces of the silk if it's folded, and sometimes it leaves residue and it's not very pretty.
After you put the excess resist back in the container, do you clean your applicator with water or with something else?
So actually what I do with the applicator is I just set it off on its own. I'm going to let it dry, and then I go back through my applicators. As you see, I have a couple of them. I go back through my applicators usually once a month, once every couple months, depending on how busy I am. With these guys, and basically I can get into the bottle and just sort of roll around the edge and pull the resist out, and it comes out in one chunk. Unfortunately, I have cleaned all of my resist bottles recently, so I don't have an example to show you. I apologize. All right. So let's talk about color now. That's the exciting part. So before you touch your brush to the banner, you need to make sure that you have a clean brush for application. I also recommend that you have a clean brush for cleanup or blending, a cup of water for cleanup, and a paper towel. If you have a complex color layout, you may also want to have reference for that. So I'll sometimes bring my phone and just sit it next to me so that I can see what I had planned for the color of a particular design. Let's see here. So when I am talking about a color reference, let me show you some of those mock-ups that I was referring to earlier. There we go. All right. So for example, there is one of the color mock-ups that I ended up doing for one of the banners I did recently. here's a good example of the various design choices that I sent to someone for this. As you see, there are, I think, 7 or 8 of them. But we just play with all kinds of layout, we play with all kinds of color, and sort of decide what is really going to look best. So then, let's see if I can find them. Okay, I'm not sure where all of those are, but anyway, so I use those color mockups to help me have visual reference for what I'm supposed to be doing. One of the things that I do recommend when you're applying color to a banner is, again, if you're right-handed, start in the upper left-hand corner. And I tend to recommend that you apply the lightest colors first, moving toward the darkest. The reason I recommend that is if a boo-boo happens, if something jumps a line, it is easier to cover the lighter colors with the darker colors. It is not easy to do it in the opposite direction. The cool part about the way that this dye works is once it saturates a piece of the silk, it minimizes the spread of any other color application in that area. So for example, since this is already painted, if I accidentally drop a drop of a different darker color in here, yes, it will still show, but it'll probably just be that one little drop instead of spreading to half of this section. So essentially it helps to minimize those boo-boos. So I'm gonna grab a cup of water real fast. Your Excellency, Disa, do you think that we need to take a break or anything?
I think we're okay. Is everyone okay, or do you want to take about a 10-minute break? I'm seeing people are okay.
Okay, cool. I'll be right back.
Alrighty. Onward, yes, absolutely.
All right. So now fun with color application. All right. The next thing I'm going to tell you is with any bottle of dye, unless you are actively using it, put the lid back on. I have learned this the very, very hard way. It's not fun. Please don't repeat my mistakes. So with each of these dyes, I recommend that you shake it up a little bit before you start. Don't do what I just did. Don't shake it over your silk if it's a production piece. I'm less worried about this one because this is my test pancake. But if you are using, or if you are shaking dye, do it away from your project because occasionally you'll have errant little drips and that's very sad. All right. So the first piece of this that I wanted to show you is just the basic behavior of the dye on the silk. It does not behave the way that regular paint does, but that can be a lot of fun. So let's see. All right. our resist is a tiny bit tacky, but it is set enough that we're good to roll here. All right. So you can just barely dip your paintbrush in. You're gonna see that color is picked up or not. There we go. And then you essentially only have to touch your brush to the silk. The dye is gonna roll on its, well, it's supposed to, oh, I know what the problem is. All right, so it's gonna basically roll like so. Now I just realized part of the issue for why that didn't flow. I actually have the silk upside down. Currently, it's not a big deal. If I flip it the other direction, you'll still be able to, ooh, I apologize, that was loud. You'll still be able to see the resist came all the way through, but there is a distinct difference in the way that color flows on this side because this is the smoother side. So you see how that color is flowing better? So I can essentially put a droplet on here and it's gonna spread. The cool part about this is it means that you do not have to get up close to those lines. You can essentially apply color in a large space and wait for it to disseminate out. All right. So the next bit, you can pack color on color. This is my favorite part. This is the part people get excited over. So this is where the color blending comes in. So essentially, I recommend if you're gonna blend a space, cover it completely with one of your colors. Then you can go in with a second or third color and color pack it. Disa, can you see this?
Yes. Do you have music going at your house?
Yeah, I do. Let me turn it off.
Somebody asked, would it be advised to check the back to make sure the resist went all the way through before starting the color?
I have never had a problem with it not going through as long as the resist was fresh.
All right.
Does that answer the question?
That answers the question.
Okay, cool. So I've added periwinkle to this edge of my, what is this? Claret. And you see it's sort of blending itself in the middle here. If I want to get an even smoother blend, I can take a dry, clean brush and essentially do these. It's going to help move the color around. Be careful not to jump over the resist lines because you can also travel color. Now let's say that I took this too far and I wanted it to meet halfway. I can go back in with my claret and I can add some more color. And it sort of bounces that other color backward. So I can use it for corrections. Right? All right. So let's say that you have a big space that you want to blend 2 or 3 colors in. Here's the magic for doing that. I take white dye. I realize that seems counterintuitive, but white dye is actually really important. One, it is brighter than the regular white silk. And 2, it provides that resist quality to the section of your banner that is supposed to remain white. So again, it helps reduce errors, but it also helps to blend. So
can you bring the can you bring it up a little bit closer so people can see the color a little bit better?
Actually,
Just for a moment.
Let me see if I can move this camera down some. Oop. Is that better?
That is better. I think it's hard to see the darker colors.
Okay, I'll pick a different color.
Okay.
All right.
I like the colors personally a lot.
So actually, let me scoot this a little forward too, so I'm not hanging off the edge. All right.
That's a really good angle. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Stay. Okay, so I've applied white to this section. I want to make sure that it stays wet. Wet is the key to color blending. Now, I can take my primary color. Let's say it's going to be bright green. And I can say, all right, I want this to be bright green right down the middle. Right. You see how it's already dispersing itself with that white? Okay. Now I can add in secondary color. If I can remember which brushes I'm using for what color. And then I can take my dry brush, smooth these guys together. Let's say I want to blend that green out into that white. All right, so I'm going to add some more blue to that back corner just because I want it to be more vibrant. So all of this is happening because this is still wet. Now that this is dry, if I try and go back in and add, let's say blue, it'll spread, but you'll notice it doesn't blend. There's a very definitive edge to it. That's because that purple was dry when I added the blue on top of it. Now, that can be really handy if I want to highlight detail. For example, if I wanted to take this blue and say, okay, this is now a shadow on this purple, then I can have a very definitive line of that blue along the purple if I want to. I could also use it to blend that shading on the purple. By keeping my purple wet again. And then adding that blue and letting it disseminate itself into the purple. And again, I'm gonna help it along just a tiny bit. So now I've got a shadow without having a line necessarily. All right. So the other thing that I wanted to show you guys is you can highlight dark colors by applying white on top of them. And let me see. I might as well stick with our purple. Nope, that's blue. There's the purple. Okay. Now, when you do this, I recommend that you pour a tiny bit of your white into a separate container because your white brush is going to get polluted from the color that you're highlighting. So you'll want to make sure that you keep that separate from the rest of your white. Doesn't have to be a lot. All right. So now if I want to highlight a piece of that purple, I can start packing white in that corner. And it may take 3 or 4 applications to get that white in there. And I can also go in and use my brush to pull color out. All right, so see how it's starting to sort of fade. So now I can go back, put some more white. It's going to get steadily brighter the more I add. All right, so now I can highlight this darker color. And again, if I want to clean up this line some, I can go back with my original purple, sort of cut down on that white. All right. So now I was going to show you guys how to do cleanup if you have an accidental color jump.
Somebody asked if for example, they wanted to do like stars on a blue background. How would that be done with this?
So you can do that a couple different ways. You can obviously resist an actual star shape and do it that way, where you paint the star white and the background blue. You can paint the entire background blue and then add the star into it. Oh, I'm making a mess. So like, time to pull out the big brushes. Like, the cool part about this dye is you can pretty much play with it forever until it's dry. Once it's dry, your ability to do things with it pretty much disappears. But while it's wet, you can keep doinking with it until you get what you want. What did I do with my white brush, you guys? All right, new white brush. Okay, so let's see if we can do a little star here. So that sort of option is here. You will notice you're not going to get super distinctive lines, but visually it's still fairly easy to see. But you'll see how that guy is spreading. Now, I might be able to clean this up a little with a smaller brush. I can go back in here and sort of clean up those lines. Give it a slightly more distinct shape. So that's the second option. The third option is there are actually salts that you can purchase for the purpose of painting banners that will suck the dye up in certain areas. And it will essentially provide a star-shaped splatter. Let me see if I have any and I can show you guys what it looks like. All right, sadly, it looks like I may have gotten rid of mine. I don't use it particularly often, but it is something that is available. I think that it actually comes in the dye sets. It's just these little containers of salt, and you can sort of scatter them over a section where you've painted, and they will literally pull the color out of that section of silk. And then basically once it's dry, you can brush them off.
Somebody actually said they use table salt for a sparkly effect.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. We had a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
Let's see. If it's starting to dry and you want to keep playing, can you lightly brush it with water?
So yes, just keep in mind the water is also going to potentially make it spread more. So I can add some of that wet back. But do you see how it's already starting to differentiate this piece here because that's dry? I'm not sure if I can. So let's see how this takes the white. Okay. So because it was not completely dry, that takes the white okay. Once it's completely dry, you cannot re-wet it, unfortunately. So for example, this green up here makes no difference whatsoever. Because it's been dry for a long time.
So is there ever a situation where you need to get the fold lines out of the silk before using the resist or the dye?
Where you need to get the what?
The fold lines
lines
out?
out?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can. It definitely makes applying resist evenly a little easier, but I don't tend to worry about it too much. I mean, you could absolutely iron the silk flat before you do this if that makes life easier for you.
So the other question that I have here is, when I dye a large area, it tends to apply unevenly and I get a marbled look. Do you know how to make large dyeing jobs look more even?
Yes. So this comes back to keep them wet. So what I tend to do if I have a large area is I pick one corner to start in. And I start applying color in this corner and start moving out. And once I hit about here and I have to start differentiating this way and this way, I take turns applying a wet coat on each side to continue moving that color that direction and keeping the edge wet. The thing that's causing the color difference is this, where you've got one piece that's dried and one piece that's wet. In the past, when I have had to apply color to very large surfaces, I tend to tap one of my partners to come and help me apply that color. The other thing that I have noticed is with darker colors like black, if you apply it and then tilt it up, you can see where the black has reached all of the silk threads and where it has not. So if it is fully saturated, you will not be able to see through it. If it is not, you will see little patches of light popping through. And as long as it's wet, you can sort of take your brush and rub it in, and that will help alleviate that uneven look.
The other question I have here is, can you iron the banner after it's done, and what happens to the Gouda?
Yes. So ironing it is actually the best way I've found to fix the color. And by fix it, I mean make it water resistant. I'm not going to say waterproof, because even though I haven't tested it, if you leave it out in the rain for a very long period of time, there is a possibility it may run if it has not been heat treated. We live in Ontario though, and I've had my banners for 10 years and never had that problem. So once I get my color applied, what I tend to do is let it sit flat for a minimum of 1 hour until everything that you touch does not come away leaving any color on your fingers. Once it has dried to the touch point, I then take it off the frame and throw it in my dryer on high for about 30 to 40 minutes. Then I pull it out of the dryer and iron it. So the way that I iron it, because I like my iron, is I've taken 2 scraps of muslin, basically some kind of cotton that was a scrap that's fairly thin. And I lay 1 layer of cotton on the ironing board. Then I put my banner on. Then I put the other layer of cotton on top of the banner and then iron it that way. And I don't tend to use steam, but you can once it's been run through the dryer. Don't do it before you run it through the dryer. I'm not sure what it would do to your color. But then I apply an iron for between 3 and 4 minutes per square foot of silk, all the way down the length of the banner. At that point, it's pretty much color fast. That also means that you're done adding color to it. So make sure that you're completely done before you heat treat it.
What temperature do you do your iron on?
I use high. So the cool part about the cotton or the muslin is that if any of this resists, like if I have a thick spot here, and it decides to dislodge and apply itself to something else, that cotton is going to absorb it and keep it off of my ironing board and my iron. The other benefit of that is it takes any of that excess resist off of the banner so that when you store them later, you can fold them up and they don't stick to themselves. Yeah, the storage of silk banners is actually one of my favorite parts about them. Like, they're beautiful and everything, but I also love that my entire household, we have like 40 people. We each have a personalized banner plus all of our household banners, and we store them in a tote that's approximately this fat and about this tall. Can't see how tall that is, maybe a foot tall. It's just a tiny Rubbermaid tote, but all like 60 of our banners go in that tote and fit perfectly fine.
Ours are wrapped around a pool noodle.
That is also a valid option.
And we have quite a few ourselves.
Yeah, a couple few. So the other thing that I wanted to address is if you have color jumps. So how to make a correction. All right. Ooh, this green does not smell very good. Sometimes the colors get a little wonky smelling. It smells a little bit like a sour egg. It doesn't mean that the color is bad. It just means that it's doing some interesting chemical reactions. All right, so let's say I'm painting this section and I accidentally jumped the line. Oh crap, I've got it in this other bit. All right, don't panic. Before it dries, grab yourself a clean brush. Grab yourself some clean water. Go in here, start scrubbing this guy. Scrubby, scrubby, scrubby. Now, it is going to spread the color. That's not a big deal. So I essentially go in here and scrub it, and I use my brush to remove the color. Can you see where it's, you see my paper towel over here where it's pulling color out? So scrub, scrub, scrub. You will notice that because it now has a connection over the line. It's also affecting a little bit of the color on that side. Not a big deal. That's something we can fix in a little bit. So basically what I've done is I've taken that bright green and I've sort of scrubbed it out into this entire section. Now I can come in with my other color, which in theory should be darker. That's my clean brush. There's my blue brush. Now I can come in with this color and say, all right, even though it looks green, it's actually meant to be blue. I'm gonna apply my blue in here. And all is well. Now, I do have to say, be careful as you approach the spot where the color jumped, because since there is a liquid connection over that resist line now, if you get too excited about applying the blue that close, it will seep into this side and we'll have basically undone our work. So just sort of gently creep toward that spot and let it do its thing. Now, do you see that's, I'm still getting a little bit of color flow on that other side. So I'm gonna come back in here with my green and just say, no, no, spread, spread. And you just kind of zhuzh it until it settles. The other thing you can do is you can wait until this green dries. And because my blue is a little darker, I can then come back and basically dry brush anything near that line that is still slightly discolored. Voila. Now, if I'm right here with my nose up to this, I can totally tell that some color jumped the line. But again, if this is 10 feet in the air, nobody's gonna be able to tell. You fixed your color jump.
So I've got a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Did you dilute your dyes with water before applying them?
No, I apply them exactly as they appear. So if you can see how liquidy it is, that's the way they come in the bottle.
The other question is the resist that came with the classroom kit flakes off when it's dry. Is the Gouda you use permanent?
So the Gouda I use is permanent. And it's interesting because if it's thick in places, you can kind of feel the texture difference. But once you iron it and any of that extra is removed, you literally cannot feel it. It does not have a texture difference. Yeah, the other thing about these is if you look at the, well, that's not a good example. If you look at the bottom, you can see where some of the dye pigment powder is in here. So that's why I recommend shaking them. It just sort of redistributes some of that color. Were there any other questions?
Nope, that's all the questions I have right now.
All right, cool. All right, so we talked about supplies, we talked about paint, we talked about resist. We talked about treating them for color last. So if you are working in a space where you have a very solid color difference from one piece to another, I would recommend, unless you're making a correction like this one, that you let about 5 minutes happen between the application of each color. This allows this to dry and helps to minimize that correction spread if that happens. But again, if you're trying to get color consistency across a large space or you're trying to do a color blend, wet is the key. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch base on, because we were talking about silk painting with regards to banners is ties. So the way that I tend to apply ties is I go to my local craft store, and usually in their jewelry making section, they have this really nice, fairly thin cotton, I guess roping, for lack of a better term. Or cording might be better. It's not the slick stuff that you would use as a notion for a piece of garb, but it's more of a natural cotton. That tends to be what I prefer to use for ties because it is long lasting. It comes in a neutral color. And my local craft store sells it in spools of like 200 yards or something like that for like $10. So I can cut off, you know, a foot long piece of it and use it for ties, and it just lasts forever. I tend to basically cut a foot long piece, turn it into a V, tack the V on the edge of my banner, and basically sew it down with my sewing machine. I just do back and forth, probably 4 or 5 times per tie, and then trim up the threads, and I'm ready to go. The other thing that I have learned through doing banners is there are some amazing banner poles available if you're not worried about periodicity so much. I know that Amazon.com has some super cool aluminum banner poles that are basically extendable. They shrink down into a 3 or 4 foot piece, and then they extend up to like 30 feet long. And we use a bunch of those in our encampment, and they're actually long enough that I can put 2 to 3 banners on each of them if I wish to. If you guys are interested in that, I can find the link for that and share it as well. All right, well, that is basically all of the talking that I have to do at you. I'm happy to answer questions. If you guys don't have any and you want to work on projects on your own, I'd be happy to hang out and give feedback, give suggestions. I'm basically open to where you guys want this to go at this point.
Since the main part of like the lecture part of the class is done, I'm gonna let's wrap up the recording bit, and then we will let people turn on their videos and chat
Sounds
if they
good.
want to.
And just for the sake of the recording, if anybody has questions, feel free and reach out to me. You can get me at annadelasera@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook under that name as well.